Hello everyone, this is Eye on Africa for Friday, June 24th. Here are the headlines. Prince Charles tells Commonwealth nations they are free to choose their destiny as the British heir to the throne expresses personal sorrow at the country's legacy of slavery. As asylum seekers wait for their requests to be processed, our correspondent in Niger takes a closer look at how long wait times and bureaucratic back and forths are taking a toll on their mental health. And an oil supertanker off the coast of Yemen has been decaying for years. Now the UN is trying to raise funds to fix it, as it warns the more than 1 million barrels of oil inside it could pose a major threat to Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti if it were to break apart. Thank you very much for being with us. We begin with that threat of a catastrophic oil spill that could have an impact on the Horn of Africa. An oil supertanker that has been moored in the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen since 1976 could break apart and unleash part or all of its 1.1 million barrels of oil. It has been left exposed to humidity and corrosion with little to no maintenance since 2015, when war erupted in Yemen. The United Nations are scrambling to raise funds to secure the supertanker, which is known as the FSO Safar. If there is an oil spill, it could have devastating consequences on Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti. Well, joining me now is David Gressley. He's the United Nations Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen. Mr. Gressley, thank you very much for being with us tonight. The UN is calling this a time bomb. How much time exactly are we talking?
Well, we don't know for sure, but it actually could be any day, any month. It has been rusting away for the last 7 years. I spoke recently to the captain of the vessel, who basically says we've been extraordinarily lucky that it hasn't broken apart or exploded already. So we're really living on borrowed time right now. We should just act and solve the problem while we can.
So I understand that it is difficult to predict the consequences of an oil spill because it depends heavily on a number of factors like weather, the season, if it were to happen, and the amount of oil involved. Tell us about some of the risks for African nations if this supertanker were to break apart.
Well, a number of models have been done to try to estimate that. Basically, Eritrea would be at risk all year long, no matter when the breakup took place. Within 5 days, the oil spill would reach the Eritrean coast. April through December, it would likely continue to move on into Djibouti and the northern coast of Somalia, effectively also blocking the Bab el-Mandeb exit from the Red Sea into the Gulf of Indian Ocean. So it would only be a matter of days before you'd see the impact on the African coast, blocking access to ports, blocking as a consequence imports that are important to those countries. Also, it would have an effect on Ethiopia that depends on those same ports. So it would be quite extraordinary, the impact, but also on fisheries that's carried out onshore, but also into the Red Sea that these countries depend upon. That too would likely be affected. The estimates I've seen, 25 years, the fishing grounds would be destroyed. So the consequences are clear and evident even across the Red Sea.
Well, what's the process to fix this?
Well, we have a clear plan. The difficulty, of course, is that Yemen is in the course of a civil war. Fortunately, we have a truce at the moment, but the difficulty is when the two parties are in conflict like that, it's very difficult to get an agreement on how to solve a problem. But in this case, we have that agreement. We have a clear plan to come in and prepare the vessel for offloading the 1 million plus barrels of oil and put it into another vessel so that it no longer is an environmental threat. This has now been agreed in Sana'a by the de facto authorities there, but also by the government of Yemen, the recognized government, and also countries in the region. So we're ready to go. We just need the funding to actually carry this out. We have 60 million out of the 80 million we need for the emergency operation. We're 20 million short from saving the Red Sea from this catastrophe. And it's a catastrophe that will happen. It's not really a question of if, it's a question of when, and we should act before it happens.
All right, David Gressley, the UN resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator for Yemen, speaking to us about this potential oil spill threat. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
The heir to the British throne says nations that belong to the Commonwealth are free to chart their own course. Prince Charles made the statement during a trip to Rwanda. He addressed the opening of a Commonwealth heads of government meeting in Kigali. During the speech, he told leaders the choice to become a republic or to abandon the Queen as heads of state was theirs alone. He also expressed personal sorrow at Britain's legacy of slavery at a time when some countries are seeking reparations for colonial-era injustices.
I want to acknowledge that the roots of our contemporary association run deep into the most painful period of our history. I cannot describe the depths of my personal sorrow at the suffering of so many as I continue to deepen my own understanding of slavery's enduring impact. If we are to forge a common future that benefits all our citizens, we too must find ways, new ways to acknowledge our past. Quite simply, this is a conversation whose time has come.
Well, let's stay in Rwanda, where construction of a new vaccine manufacturing plant has begun. When it opens, it will be the first factory in Africa to produce mRNA vaccines, which have become more widely used since the COVID-19 pandemic. Production is set to begin by early 2024. Having an mRNA vaccine plant in Africa will make the continent less dependent on imported vaccines, which has been a major issue in this pandemic. Shirley Sitbon has the details.
This is not just any ceremony. What's about to happen on this Kigali hilltop is likely to change the lives of tens of millions of Africans. It will become the first mRNA vaccine production site on the continent. Here's a virtual tour of the lab sent from Germany's BioNTech. Several sets of so-called BioNtainers, production containers, which can make up to 50 million doses every year.
This vaccine centre will not only be for COVID-19, it will also be used to produce vaccines against diseases that exist on the African continent like tuberculosis or malaria. So this is a strong symbol.
The COVID pandemic stressed Africa's dependence on vaccines made elsewhere, Europe, the US, or in Asia. There is one COVID-19 vaccine factory in South Africa, but it's based on traditional virus-based technology. The factory will eventually be run by local scientists, technicians, and health professionals.
This innovative institution will provide a solution for workforce development from short courses through to graduate degrees.
Only 17% of Africa's 1.3 billion people are fully vaccinated against COVID. That's in part due to a lack of supplies and logistical problems, which could be eased with local factories.
Moroccan officials say 5 people have been killed and dozens injured when a huge crowd tried to cross into the Spanish enclave of Melilla from Morocco. 2,000 people gathered in front of fences early Friday morning. 2 hours later, 500 of them began entering Melilla, jumping over the roof of a border checkpoint after cutting through fencing with a bolt cutter. Around 130 people made it through and are currently being processed at a reception center for immigrants. Morocco's Interior Ministry says the 5 deaths occurred when people fell from the fence surrounding the Spanish enclave. It also said 140 Moroccan security personnel had been injured. Meanwhile, Spain also reported casualties. 49 police officers were injured in the incident. Now to Libya, where the Islamic State group is regaining momentum, making the country increasingly dangerous for sub-Saharan migrants on their way to Europe. 4 years ago, in neighboring Niger, authorities and the UNHCR established something called an emergency transit mechanism, a procedure that allows the most vulnerable people to be evacuated from Libya to Niger and to be granted asylum legally elsewhere. But the endless wait is taking its toll on the mental health of these asylum seekers. France 24's Harold Girard went to meet some of them.
Makia Baba Moussa spent 8 months in prison in Libya. She was arrested by coast guards on her way to Europe. Under the ETM program, the UN Refugee Agency got her out of jail and evacuated her to Niger for an emergency transit to Europe or North America.
The Libyan authorities arrested me and my 2 children in the middle of the Mediterranean to put us in prison. First, the one in Kirin, for the first 6 months from October 2017. I was 1 month pregnant at the time.
Here, all were enrolled in the program because of the mental health disorders they developed due to the violence they suffered on their journey. Makia is under treatment for diagnosed bipolar disorder. The extreme violence sub-Saharan migrants endure in Libyan prisons have triggered psychiatric disorders. Because of their fragile mental health, many refugees in transit in Niger cannot cope with the weight anymore.
In psychiatry, there isn't always a cause for mental illness, but rather triggering factors. The long wait time could increase the risk of a psychiatric disorder. In the long term, without mental health support, they could develop psychosis or even chronic psychosis that require long-term or even lifelong treatment.
Makia has been in Niger for 4 years now. She's waiting to relocate to Europe or North America with her family. For her, the wait is unusually long. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 90% of the refugees evacuated from Libya under the ETM program left Niger within a year. But the situation in Libya could get worse as the Islamic State group regains momentum in the country, putting refugees further at risk as the first to bear the brunt of insecurity both physically and mentally.
That's Eye on Africa for this Friday, June 24th. Thank you very much for watching. Live from Paris continues with Julia Kim in just a moment.
Falcone logicamente è stato ucciso, è stata accelerata questa sua morte perché stava facendo la dislocazione, un problema di tutti i mafiosi.
In 1992, a few weeks apart, 2 anti-mafia judges were murdered in Sicily, attacks that deeply affected the island's inhabitants.
Quello che tu avevi immaginato quella sera come un bel ritratto di 2 personaggi diventa quasi non più una fotografia, ma diventa un segno, un simbolo.
Where the law of silence once reigned, people are gradually finding the courage to speak out.
Perché dovete lottare, dovete essere curiosi e dovete farvi tante domande e non dovete dare più il consenso alla mafia.
30 years on, the fight against the mafia continues. Watch Cosa Nostra Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.